Good afternoon, everyone, and Assalamu alaikum. We are ready to begin. Thank you so much to the government of Qatar for hosting the Doha Forum, and thank you also for this panel on inclusive economic systems for sustainable growth. Um, Thank you to all of you for being here and looking forward to the conversation with my panel over here. I'm Dr. Anita Zaidi. I have the good honor of being the president of Gender Equality, the founding president of Gender Equality at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We believe strongly that for countries to be prosperous and grow, women are very important economic actors that must be part of the unlocking their economic potential, must be part of the solution for resilient economic growth. Um, I have on my panel His Excellency President Macky Sall of Senegal, who has been the president of Senegal since 2012. Thank you so much for being here, Your Excellency. We've had the good fortune of meeting before in Senegal, and then earlier this year also I was there for the Grand Challenges meeting, which we co-hosted with you. Um, Welcome to Juliana Rotich, who is from Safaricom. She's representing the private sector, and Julia heads up the integrated fintech solutions and has a focus on how to address challenges in the digital economy that address the needs of women. President Macky Sall, let me begin with you. We are still waiting for one of our panelists from the UNDP administrator to join. Hopefully, he will come in the middle, and we can talk to him as well. So, Your Excellency, you've been such a vocal champion for women and girls empowerment in Senegal and in the West African region. And so, I'm going to ask my first question to you on how do you, I know you were just at COP28, you were telling me, um, how do you see women's role in the economy, and what have you seen happen in Senegal through all of the policies I know that you have worked on over the years? And how, as you've also been the leader of the African Union, the president for the Africa Union just most recently, how are African leaders thinking about the larger issues and the role of women in the economy?
Thank you, Dr. Zaidi. Uh, Maybe I will ask you to use yours. I said, I don't know if
Okay.
you have a translation in French
Yes, I
because
will use
I'm
my.
speaking. No, no French. So they said no French translation. Anyway, I'll try with my very poor English to explain my. Thank you, first of all, for this session. And also, I want to thank Juliana to have this conversation with you. As you know, Senegal has a very young population, like all we have, all over Africa. The average is 19 years, average of our population. And we have, of course, majority are women, 51%, the global. In Senegal, we have quite 50-50. But when we talk about inclusion, and when we have a goal to develop our country, we have to take care of two targets. The one is women, and the second is children or youth. For the women, we develop a lot of public policies we call inclusion and autonomization because we try to develop facilities to let them have loan without interest or with a very low interest of 5% maximum. And I created a kind of bank for women and children. We call that their delegation for entrepreneurship, but for quick entrepreneurship. And the government, since this last year, we financed more than 250,000 women and children, but the women occupied 80% of this fund, more than 300 million US dollar was given to this loan just to allow them to have autonomization and to put them in the economy. So we know also we have nano financing, which is a small amount of money, but very useful for those who have nothing and who need day to day to have some commerce, some trades. So it is also a target we try to develop. And for those categories, in this last 5 years also, we put more than 100 million US dollars, and it's a daily, trade. So I do believe that to develop Africa, we should give opportunity for women and to give education to them, because when you educate one woman, you educate a society, because she transmit her knowledge and to his family. So it is very important to do that. And also we promote a lot of laws to defend their rights, and also to criminalize, what we call viol, which is huh? Rapes. Yeah, now the law is more heavy in Senegal to protect women. And we have a lot of public policies to protect women and their rights. Yeah, this is what I want to say. In the second hand, talking about inclusion in the worldwide, we need to make reform in the global institution, particularly the Bretton Woods institution, because everybody knows that how things are working since Second World. We need a new governance, more inclusive and more open and more transparent. So I thank also Dr. Uh, Stein from UNDP, one of our good partner in Senegal, talking about inclusion, particularly in the rural area where we develop many programs with the UNDP to give inclusion for those people, to bring them electricity, water, and also helping the women to 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 give them more capacity and working less with their own capacity. So thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome, Mr. Steimer. It's good to have you. I'll come back to you. Actually, I was going to ask you a follow-up question, Your Excellency, on the COP, still related to the COP 28, where there was a talk about climate adaptation and then the global goal that is there on adaptation. And how is that global goal on adaptation thinking about women's economic empowerment? Is that part of the framework and the metrics that are being set up? What did you uh, what's your impression of that?
Yeah, about the adaptation,
Mhm.
as you know, as Africans, we are those who are not polluting at all, because we don't have an industrialized economy, not yet. So the total emission for Africa is less than 4%, while the consequences of the uh, climate change is hitting very strongly Africa. That's why we said our goal is to develop our countries, but we need to have another way, not the same way. So for that, we need adaptation program, and this adaptation program should be financed by those who are polluting really the planet. And we are ready also to work on the renewable energy, but we cannot just accept what the rich countries are telling us today. No more fossils for you, while they are using fossil. They are using coal, they are using fuel, they are using any gas. And when we will have gas or oil in our soil, and we need to give even electricity to the half of population, we cannot just accept what happened today. That's why we are struggling for climate change. We are working to have renewable, but this play have to be fair. We want justice on transition, and I think the women can work also on the matter of renewable or on energy. Uh, so it is absolutely possible to include the women and their development on this issue. But we need justice on climate change. for the developing countries.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll take the opportunity now to introduce our third panelist, Mr. Achim Steiner from UNDP. He's been at UNDP since 2017 as the administrator, but has a long history, more than 3 decades, in advocating for sustainable development, inclusive development, and international cooperation. So I'm very pleased to have you here. Um, so let me frame the conversation a bit more. I was waiting for you to be here, and so we are here because when we set up the Sustainable Development Goals several years ago, we did not imagine that the world would be where it is today, where we are dealing with, as President Saul just talked about, the debt crises related to the pandemic, war and instability, climate change that is making achieving the sustainable development goals much harder than we thought 8 years ago. Um, and what are solutions that can get us out of this is where I would love to have more conversation. Our co-chair, Melinda French Gates, put out a piece in The Economist in October where she talked about the importance of unlocking women's economic power as a solution for inclusive and sustainable economic growth. And she talked about three particular solutions. She talked about inclusive financial systems. We know that women lack access to affordable capital. And in developing countries, there are not that many salaried jobs. So, women, the best way that women can earn an income, and any person can earn an income, is by starting small businesses. But women face a lot of barriers to accessing affordable capital. So she talked about that. She talked about inclusive digital systems. The digital economy is the 21st century. Roads and bridges that were there for the 19th and 20th century. So I'm talking about things like digital IDs, digital payment systems, digital connectivity, and we see women being left behind. And how do we address that? And then the third thing she talked about was all of the barriers that women face in being full economic participants, which are some of which are sector specific, like in agriculture, lack of access to information, but some are very cross-cutting, such as access to childcare, lack of access to childcare, lack of access to family planning to be able to control, their how many children women want to have. Um, so all of those are potential levers or solutions that we can work on and think about how we do them in a much faster pace than we have historically. So let me come to you with sort of next question related to agricultural systems and climate change and the role of women. Um, you know that over two-thirds of women's employment in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia is agri-food business, and so agriculture is clearly a very big sector for inclusive economic development, and also very related to the climate change and climate adaptation conversations. So, what solutions are there that can shift food systems to be more inclusive, adaptable to climate change, and more directly beneficial for women farmers? Is the specific question I'd like you to address.
Thank you for a PhD level question that you have just launched at me, and I have 2 minutes to respond. But may I first of all greet President Macky Sall and Juliana. It's also very nice to meet you here in Doha Live. We serve together on another board, and um, begin by answering the question that I think has to do with inclusion. I mean, one of the great challenges in any country, any economy, is that as you grow your economy, the risk of leaving some of those behind simply because they're not necessarily at the front line of that growth economy. I'm always very struck that, particularly in a developing country or developing economy context, what we see when it comes to fast growth sectors, we don't necessarily look to the agricultural sector because it is, mass employer, but actually on the GDP of a country, always structurally already one of the second, third, fourth sectors. And so we create very often an investment economy that is, larger scale, allows us to attract corporate investors, and it becomes an economy that almost exists in parallel to the people's economy. And I think President Macky Sall challenged us and challenged, I think, Senegal a few years ago, and he said, look, we need to modernize, we need to industrialize, but we also need to invest in the rural economy. That, I don't know whether you mentioned PUDC, this Programme d'urgence de développement communautaire, that was groundbreaking in the sense that alongside a modernization infrastructure, urban skills development, etc., Senegal invested hundreds of millions in quickly upgrading also the infrastructure for people living in the rural economy. So if you want to address food systems, you have to go back to where people actually grow, produce, and either process or don't process food. And I think very often we overlook these sectors, and no more is that, in a sense, a double failure, because very often, particularly in West Africa, for example, women are at the forefront of the agricultural sector. So it's a double loss to the economy. But it is a dilemma because let's be honest, I just came back from 4 days in Rwanda. And, in Rwanda, you have that same phenomenon, a very focused strategy to develop, to create an economy around which Rwandans can really move forward. And with sometimes remarkable GDP growth rates, but equally a country that is conscious that there is now an economy. And I had a wonderful symbol of it yesterday. Driving back to Kigali, Rwanda has installed speed traps, radar speed traps, with a wonderful name of Sophia. I'm not sure who came up with that, but what is phenomenal is that that speed trap in the middle of the rural area where there was a farmer seeding their field is this radar digitally connected speed trap that within half an hour delivers to you, this is great e-government service, your speeding fine on your cell phone. Now, these are two economies, and Juliana lives in the middle of this digital, world that can either be inclusive or it takes off on a trajectory that leaves many behind. So I think much of what we do in UNDP today with many of our partners and countries is to try and understand how can you have both. I mean, African economies need to grow. They need to grow where they have the possibility to attract investors, technology, maybe the comparative advantage. But that growth needs to also bring others with it. And this is, I think, where, in particular, digital becomes an interesting example. If you only focus on an urban startup entrepreneurial culture, you will immediately exclude many young people who don't happen to either have had the education to just jump in, maybe living in rural towns. So you can design for a different kind of digital entrepreneurship culture. And again, I point to Rwanda, but also Kenya, as places where government decisions were very deliberate. Kenya took a very early decision to start extending the fiber optic cable outside of the capital. This was not a commercially driven decision because it was not a high revenue earner initially. But what it created was a whole new set of platforms around the country where people could begin from where they live now and survive now to enter into that digital economy. In Rwanda, we have been part of literally investing in a very broad set of platforms to nurture entrepreneurial talent. The startup culture is not a, automatic 9 out of 10 will succeed culture, but in the process, you are helping thousands of young people to develop skills that they would not have had before. They have access to technology, including, for instance, setting up something we call the Unipod in a university in Rwanda, where while students are at university and still studying, they already have access to a lab where you have a, for instance, hybrid engine for a car. So you can begin to look at what could I do with this in terms of moving it forward. Going upstream in helping people who normally would be left behind, and particularly also girls when it comes to STEM disciplines at university, at school. Those are, I think, systemic responses. And I could obviously tell you a lot more, but let me stop here for a moment and say, we need to recognize there will be development pathways that go at different levels of speed and pace. The tragedy of development so often has been is that in being focused on the fastest moving, we overlook the largest group of the population, and sooner or later that hurts development progress.
And in agriculture, this is so true. Uh, Juliana, I'll come to the digital economy in a bit more detail. So, as I said, as I was referencing this piece by Melinda Gates, I came across something that you had written on that the biggest problem that you find is that women do not have access to affordable capital. Can you say a little bit more about what your learning has been as you have worked so deeply in the IT sector with your experience with M-Pesa and and all of the other? I know you also have a startup, a nonprofit that looks at connecting women. And connecting excluded people to the digital economy.
Thank you very much, and it's truly an honor to be part of this panel. Um, there are three key things when it comes to the barriers that women face when it comes to access to capital. I think first is before before people can invest, they've got to know that there is potential and there is opportunity. Alan Taylor, who is one of the Kaufman Fellows, when he was in Nairobi a few months ago, talked about the importance of taking people who may be oblivious or unaware of the potential in women entrepreneurs, or not just women in entrepreneurship in general, taking them from being oblivious to being aware, and from being aware to being interested, and from being interested to actually investing. So I think the first part of it is lifting up and amplifying the stories of women entrepreneurs who exist in every vertical imaginable. I happen to live in East Africa, in Nairobi, in Kenya, where it is not uncommon for someone to have two side hustles, to have two or three businesses running. In a recent roundtable that we had at our company, where we were talking to local businessmen and businesswomen, um, an interesting thing that we learned from particularly the businesswomen was that some of the solutions that are out there are not tailor made for her. Um, they are sold as if it's a different business, it's sort of generalized. And I think there's an opportunity to do more to provide contextual solutions and that serve a majority of people. And we've been able to actually do this. We've been able to see how this is possible through the work that I currently do in conjunction with my colleagues at financial services in Safaricom, more popularly known as M-Pesa. And we've seen that when provided with dignified access to credit, micro entrepreneurs, I think your excellency, you mentioned about nano investing, that given access to credit and given access to investment, that first of all their repayment rates are far higher than any other funds that we've seen. The Women Enterprise Fund, we've seen the repayment rates of that being very, very good. So that's number one. So again, speaking back to that idea of seeing the potential and tapping into that, elevating the stories and connecting them to these sources of capital and sources of credit, of cheaper credit. The other point that I'd like to mention is that improving the ease of doing business also lifts the economic fortunes of women. So all of the macro um, conversations that are happening at a national level, at a regional level, and at a global level around what more we need to do for these low middle income countries will contribute to women's path of actually growing their businesses. And then last but not least is that I firmly believe that technology entrepreneurship is the purview of women. Out of the 70,000, more than 70,000 developers that are part of the Safaricom financial services community, 18% of them are women. Uh, I'm committed, and we like to say that we really are in the business of transforming lives, because if I can if we can add the ratio of women participating in building the tools that then solve for the market needs of women entrepreneurs, and also contribute even in building better AI systems and basically participating in the digital economy, I think we stand a better chance of building much better tools. And so I'll just also quickly mention that back to the story about micro entrepreneurship. There's a woman called Susan Jerry in Kenya who sells vegetables by the roadside, and she is able to save using just her phone. And we believe in meeting all entrepreneurs at whatever level they are. So from micro, SME, enterprise, and even if you have a fintech, there's an amazing woman called Hilda Mora who runs one of the fastest growing fintechs. They all plug into the M-Pesa ecosystem. And so Susan is able to save money on her M-Pesa um, wallet in partnership with one of the banks, and she can access loans. Um, so something that would where she would have had to go to a banking hall and wait there for hours to be able to see a well, to see a clerk so that they could access credit. They can just quickly access that money at 3 a.m., get the stock, and by the end of the day, being able to pay that back. So there are countless stories of women like her, and also with the um, uh, recently announced. So this was the Women Enterprise Fund was launched March 2023, and it was a follow up to the Financial Inclusion Fund that was done in conjunction with the government of Kenya from November of 2023. I was part of the team, and since then, as part of the Financial Inclusion Fund, more than 7 million Kenyans repeatedly borrow in such a fashion to access really low cost credit. There's a lot that's possible from every level of entrepreneurship, not just in Kenya, but I think also regionally.
Wonderful, thank you. Um, so, related to what Juliana just said, President Macky Sall, in terms of innovations, which I think of all of these as innovations and access to affordable credit. Um, I know you recently co-hosted with us the Grand Challenges meeting in Dakar in October, and I would love to hear your thoughts on. And so, this is a meeting that Gates Foundation with the different governments hosts annually, and we talk about the innovations that are possible in global health and in agriculture. Um, and so, coming to the agriculture side again, we know that at the COP28, CIGAR, which is the Premium Institute for Agricultural Research in the world, CIGAR centers, CGIAR. They presented an investment case for how innovations, thousand innovations, if they were implemented, can really help smallholder farmers. How do you think about agricultural innovations and the link to smallholder farmers with things like dual use poultry, where chicken that can be give eggs as well as the meat, and so it's a double return on investment. How do you think about those for Senegal and the context of West Africa? And have these been conversations at the Africa Union leadership level?
Thank you. This time I will speak in French because I think now the translation is
Okay.
available.
Right. Great.
So, merci beaucoup,
Mhm.
Dr.
Thank
Saidi.
you very
Merci
much.
également notre ami Hachim.
I'd like
Je
to
suis
thank
très
our
heureux de
friend
pouvoir
Hashim.
revenir
I'm very
sur le
happy
grand challenge
to talk
que la
about
Fondation Bill et
the
Melinda
huge
Gates
challenge
nous a fait
faced
l'honneur
by the Bill and Melinda Gates
de se réunir à
Foundation,
Dakar
which gave
au
us
mois
the honor
d'octobre,
of meeting in
le
Dakar
président de
in the
Bill
month of
lui-même,
October
sur une thématique très importante
on
pour nous,
a very
qui est la
important
santé.
topic for
La
us,
santé et les
namely
réponses
health,
que les États peuvent
and the
apporter,
responses that
en particulier les États
states are
africains,
giving,
puisque,
mainly African
comme vous le savez,
states, because
l'Afrique
as you know,
ne produit que 1% des
Africa
vaccins
only
qu'il
produces
utilise.
1% of
1%.
the vaccines that it
Notre ambition au
uses.
niveau de l'Union
Our
africaine avec les
ambition
partenaires est
when
de
it comes
produire
to the
à peu
African
près
Union is to
40%,
produce approximately
50% des
40 to
vaccins d'ici
50% of those
2030.
vaccines by
Un grand challenge,
2013.
mais grâce
Coordination with our
à l'action
partners.
de la
This is a huge
Fondation Bill
challenge.
Gates, à
However,
l'action de
thanks to
certains
the Bill Gates
partenaires,
Foundation and
la
thanks to
première fois,
our
nous
cooperation with
voulons,
some
dès l'année prochaine
partners
et
for the
dès la
first
fin de
time,
cette année,
and
commencer les
starting end of
premières
this year,
unités de production
early
de
next year, we'll
vaccins,
be able to
pas
start the
seulement
first
du fill and
production of
finish,
vaccine
pour ce qui
units, not
concerne
only
le
from the
vaccin
fill and finish
contre
regarding
la COVID-19,
the
mais
COVID-19
déjà, je dois rappeler que le
vaccine,
Sénégal est l'un
because I
des rares
need
pays qui
to
produit
remind
le
you that
vaccin
Senegal is
contre
one
la
of
fièvre jaune
the few
avec
countries that
l'Institut Pasteur de Dakar.
produce
Et
the
nous avons
yellow
pu
fever vaccine in
investir
cooperation with
près
the
de 300
Institute
millions de
Pasteur. We
dollars
were able
avec
to
les
invest
partenaires,
$300
l'État du
billion
Sénégal et ses
with
partenaires,
our partners. I'm
pour
talking about
développer une
Senegal and
fabrique,
its
une
partners
manufacture,
in
une
order
production
to
de vaccins
develop a
qui pourra
factory
à
that
terme
will
produire
produce
300
vaccines and
millions
which
de
will be
doses
able to
pour
produce
l'Afrique.
300 million
Et
doses
bien sûr, le
for
challenge pour nous,
Africa.
c'est de
Our
pouvoir trouver
challenge
les
is
plateformes
to be
d'achat,
able to
que
find
ça ne servira à rien tous
purchasing
ces efforts si à la fin on
platforms
produit des vaccins qui ne sont pas
because it's
achetés.
useless to produce
Donc,
vaccines which
notamment
are not purchased.
l'UNICEF,
Of course,
Gavi, et on invite tous les
UNICEF
partenaires
and Gavi and
qui
all
interviennent
the
dans nos
partners
vaccinations
which are
pour
involved
que
in
ces vaccins
vaccination are
produits
invited
pour le
in
continent et
order
dans le
to help us
continent soient
produce
aussi
these
achetés. Donc,
vaccines in
nous travaillons
the
donc
continent
dans
and
ce
for the
cadre
continent, and we invite them to help
pour
us
que l'Afrique ait une certaine
in the sale
souveraineté
of these
sanitaire,
vaccines.
en tout cas
Africa
qu'on
needs
puisse
to
avoir une réponse
enjoy a kind of
plus adaptée par rapport à la
sanitary
crise
and
telle que nous l'avons
health
connue sur la COVID.
independence and
Sur
autonomy so
l'agriculture
that we
également, je
become more
pense
autonomous
que
than what we
c'est un peu le même constat.
were during the
Moins
pandemic.
on a des ressources, moins on
When
est
it comes
capable
to
de faire face
resources,
aux aléas
the
climatiques
less resources
qui
we
influent
have,
directement
the
sur la production. Je vais
less
vous donner un seul
capacities
chiffre.
we have to
En Afrique,
face
nous avons
environmental changes. I'll
en
give you an
moyenne
example. In Africa, we have
17 kg d'engrais,
approximately 17
avec
kilograms of
17 kg,
uh,
pendant qu'en moyenne en Europe, on est
pesticides,
à plus de
whereas in
100 à
Europe,
150
we
kg.
have 100 to
Donc, ouais, c'est un
150
facteur
kilograms.
10. On fait 10 fois plus d'engrais dans les
So
pays en
we
développement
have
que
10 times
dans les
more
pays
fertilizers
sous-développés. Donc, il
in
va sans dire
the
que la
developed
productivité,
countries as
évidemment, va
compared to
être 10
developing
fois
countries. And this
inférieure,
will
ne serait-ce que sur le seul
impact
critère de l'engrais.
production only
Il y a
based on
d'autres
the
facteurs
criterion
comme
of
l'eau, la
fertilizers.
maîtrise de
There's
l'eau.
another
Le
factor,
changement
such
climatique
as
aujourd'hui
water,
expose
climate
l'agriculture
change
à des
is
inconnus. Parce
exposing
que d'une année
agriculture
à
to
l'autre,
unknown factors
on
because
passe d'une
from one year
sécheresse
to another
à
we are
une
moving
inondation. Donc,
from
on n'a plus de
drought
capacité de
to
prédire
floods. Therefore,
avec
we have
exactitude
no
ces
capacity
changements
to
climatiques.
predict
En même temps, la
exactly
question des
those
semences
climate
se
changes.
pose
Same
entre
when
les
it comes
semences
to
des
the issue
paysans,
of
les semences traditionnelles
seeds. We have
et les
traditional
semences
seeds,
dites industrielles. Quel choix?
industrial
Est-ce qu'il
seeds,
faut faire le saut
farmers' seeds.
vers
We
les
need
OGM,
to think
organismes
whether
génétiquement
we
modifiés,
have
accroître
to
les
move
rendements,
to genetically
lutter davantage
modified organisms,
contre les
improve
maladies
the
sur
production,
les plantes? C'est un sujet
fight
global,
diseases. It's a
mais c'est un sujet
worldwide
qui se pose à
topic,
nous.
but it's a
Et
topic
nous avons
which is
aussi
crucial
à
for us and that we
développer
need to tackle. We
l'investissement dans le
also need
secteur
to
agricole.
develop
Et c'est ce qui
investment in
manque
the
le plus en
agricultural
Afrique.
sector,
Il
and
faut que
this
le
is what
secteur
we are
privé
lacking in
investisse
Africa. The private sector
afin que l'agriculture
should
soit une activité comme toute autre
invest in
activité,
agriculture so that
comme le
agriculture
commerce,
becomes
comme
an
l'investissement dans
activity
d'autres secteurs,
like
que
trade
celui qui y
and like
travaille
any other
puisse
sector. The
gagner de
person
l'argent.
working in
Et pour
this
ça, il
sector
faut
should be able
investir sur
to
la maîtrise de
make
l'eau, sur
money. Therefore,
l'aménagement,
we need
sur
to
la
invest in water
transformation.
management and
Alors, c'est
transformation
autant de sujets sur lesquels,
in
bien sûr,
so
nous essayons de nous
many
battre.
topics that
Et
we are
récemment, nous avons fait une
fighting for.
rencontre sur le
Recently,
Dakar
we
Agricole
had
2
a
avec
meeting
le groupe de la Banque
in
africaine
Dakar
de
Agriculture
développement.
2 with
Nous
the
avons pu faire des
African
compacts avec
Development
tous les
Bank.
pays
We've
africains et
had
nous avons pu
meetings
mobiliser
with African
$72
countries, and we're
milliards
able to mobilize
depois
$72 billion
devem
worth of
financer por
projects in
a
order
segurança
to be
alimentar
able to
continua
move
principal continent,
towards
né?
food
Nous battons
sovereignty for
essentiellement.
the continent. We are fighting, and I believe that we are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we are going to run out of time. So I'm going to ask for brief responses now. I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Steiner. Um, so we are seeing backsliding on equality in many parts of the world, and as we know, when climate change is happening, and President, so I'll just describe this very well. It hits women first, and it hits women the hardest. Now, I've heard that despite all of the commitments to gender equality, we're seeing big gaps. For example, of the 632 billion in climate finance, only 5 billion is tagged to gender. So how is UNDP, and your personal capacity, you can answer if you want, how do we change this? How do we make gender more salient in the climate conversation?
I think, first of all, by looking where women are most constrained or empowered to act on, whether it is climate change now, President Macky Sall spoke about the whole domain of medicine, of health, or in the productive sectors or in the digital sector. And I think, um, let me take you to an extreme example of backsliding, which is Afghanistan in today's world. We took a very deliberate decision, first of all, not to leave Afghanistan, although many had argued that we should not stay there after that ominous day or week in August 2 years ago. Um, we decided to stay because we believe that even in its worst moments, a country has to have a way in which it not only goes into survival mode, it not only becomes, from the international community's point of view, a humanitarian caseload, so to speak. We have to look, even in sometimes the most dire circumstances, for ways in which we can help people to survive by being able to earn a livelihood. And we then took a very deliberate decision, because it was expected what would, in a sense, happen, to home in on something that many consider to be marginal and often overlooked, that there are 70,000 micro and small enterprises that are women-led in Afghanistan. We knew those enterprises. We also, through working with the Women's Chamber of Commerce, with the NGOs, with local administrations in the years before and through COVID, they were actually reachable. So we immediately put together a program with many other partner agencies, NGOs also, called the Upper Day Program, and made it a priority to enable us collectively to reach them in order to maintain their ability to continue their business or to restart their business. And once you realize that for every woman-led business, there's probably 3 to 5 other women who work and benefit and gain some form of livelihood by being engaged by that business. Each of those women in turn looks after 5 to 10 people in their household. We have reached millions of people by focusing with relatively limited amounts of money on precisely the most vulnerable sector that, again, on the aggregate, screenshot of an economy appears almost invisible, but is actually the backbone for millions of people to survive by not having to leave their home and village, to go and queue in a maybe provincial capital for food rations, but to earn their livelihood. We are now investing in solar and photovoltaic, access to electricity for agriculture, but also in Yemen, we have deliberately chosen to work with women to run these solar off-grid networks in villages, because in Yemen, virtually no national electricity supply exists today. And these women now run enterprises that not only allow them to earn a living in their communities, they actually provide electricity to their village communities. So you asked me, give me some examples. It's basically, if you care about the fact that there is gender inequality, and secondly, you believe you can contribute to at least addressing some elements of it, you start by asking where women are able to act. And it's not in theory, because they are actors in our economy, in our society. Zoom out for a moment, and we go back maybe to this entrepreneurial startup world. Inevitably, more men seem to be at the forefront of, going into business, having perhaps the education, having had the support from home. So again, very deliberately, and as we speak today in Nairobi, in fact, Youth Connect is happening, an amazing platform that dozens of African nations now use to engage with young people And again, there we can make a very deliberate effort to bring young women and girls onto the podium into these events so that they leave feeling that actually this is not a closed door to us or a closed economy. Investing in early skills, going back into schools. We all talk about the digital economy that lies ahead of us. Juliana, you can speak to that with more authority than most. If you then don't go into the education sector and make sure that school leavers are actually digitally literate, it becomes a sort of Darwinism of the best educated rather than a opportunity for those who traditionally would have been excluded. So I could give you many more examples like this. I think we all in our development field still struggle. And there are still in many countries cultural reasons, traditions, laws, simple things like, you know, revisiting land ownership legislation has a great deal to do with where women either become empowered actors or literally have to invest on something they don't know whether it'll be taken away from them again tomorrow. So governance is another key area for UNDP. But I want to just end my remarks by saying, and I want to link it both to the governance end of the equation on gender and to what President Macky Sall just referred to, for instance, in the hypocritical context of global climate discussions when we talk about, you know, maybe those who shout the loudest in asking Africa not to tap its fossil fuels while continuing to dig deeper and further themselves than ever before. In UNDP, I hope we will never be in a country that would say to them, you know, you must not touch your fossil fuels. But I think President Macky Sall and I would never disagree that the future of Senegal's energy system ultimately will be a low carbon, decarbonized infrastructure. The question is it always a developing world that has to forego its resources in order to make up for other people's continued exploitation of fossil fuels? Or are we going to reverse that finally into an investment, into a co-investment that would allow, for instance, in West Africa, where the majority of people don't have access to electricity to this day, to actually view the green transition as the opportunity rather than the tax on being a latecomer or however you want to call it. And I think the same is true for gender. We sometimes enter a national, cultural, economic, and political system with a very high finger. I never consider UNDP's role to be a preacher to a country in which we work, but to be a critical partner that is invited by the country to be there because we are the UNDP and because we have a Charter of the United Nations in which gender equality in our work today is a fundamental principle, is a meeting of equals that then together tackle what often are challenges that are not, you know, singular to a developing country challenge. In fact, let's be honest, we see a lot of gender pushback happening in some of the richest societies in the world today. So this is, in the true sense of the word, an SDG 2030 agenda issue. We no longer in UNDP want to think of the development agenda as a
Developing
southern
country
agenda. It is
Yes.
in fact a way in which societies make choices, make informed choices, and we are part of being able to support that process.
Thank you very much for that. And also very glad that you have persevered in Afghanistan and so many women are sustaining meager livelihoods through the efforts of UNDP. I did want to make this point that many laws still hold women back, and land ownership is one that you mentioned. Only 1% of land in the world is owned by women, and women are still the majority of farmers. Another statistic that I came across is like 101 countries have laws that discriminate against women in access to credit and capital. So those are all things that are in our power to change. I'm going to last question, and we do want to save one question for the audience. So Juliana, if you could be brief. Um, so everybody is talking about what the potential of the digital economy. Mr. Steiner just mentioned lack of literacy as holds women back there as well, and we know that 400 million women right now don't even have a cell phone, right? Something as basic as a cell phone. How is Safaricom addressing issues like these?
Thank you.
Mhm.
So just to piggyback on the conversation around digital literacy, um, for the first time, Safaricom started an assembly plant in Kenya,
Mhm.
specifically to drive down the cost of a smartphone.
Mm.
And the hope here is that we can increase the base of people who have access to the smartphone, because more often than not, the smartphone is the entry point for many people into the digital economy. It's no longer some of us old school people who used to use we used to use the internet through our computers. Mostly now, people get into the internet and the digital economy through their smartphones. So that's number one. And then number two is we layer on that with super apps and APIs that enable so for the super apps, we enable the consumers to be able to access um, additional services in addition to financial services. So they can access the Financial Inclusion Fund. It's also called the Hustler Fund, the Women Enterprise Fund, through the super apps. And we also created a specific M-Pesa business super app that gives business owners tools to help them to grow their businesses. And also, last but not least, is we're working on adding more tools for them to be financially literate. So just layering it on and adding financial literacy as part of their journey. And the idea here is that once we get you on the on ramp into the digital economy, we want to continue to walk with you into financial literacy and into financial health, where women um, can find out ways that they can invest, that they can save, and they can even participate in the securities exchanges. We're working on something that will be launched very soon, where millions of Kenyans will be able to access the Nairobi Stock Exchange and invest and grow their money. So we really want to open it up and continue to make it a level playing field for as many women and for as many women as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, in the 1 minute that we have remaining, is there any question from the audience that you would like our panelists to address? There is a question right there. Okay, gentlemen. Yeah, okay. Mm.
I wish to thank the presenters, His Excellency President Sall, Senegal, Mr. Steimer of the UNDP, Juliana Rotich of Safaricom, and the moderator Anita Zaida. The presentations were really instructive and very valuable. But what I have seen somewhat missing is that Africa is now as a crossroad, particularly countries uh, from the part of the world I come from, Gambia, neighbor Senegal. We have this migration challenge. The first thing, I've not even seen it as part of the discussions for this two-day international forum, but it's a matter for us, matter of concern. But for me, I believe that the solution in addressing migration is found in reskilling Africa. If you look at inclusive economic systems, even gender, from the gender perspective, the women, majority of women who are active economically are in the informal sector. But the challenge is we need to skill, we need to reskill, we need to upskill our workforce. And we are doing this not only for our countries, but for even for export, because I'm from the Gambia. I was a former National Assembly member, but I'm also the Secretary General of a newly established organization, Sub-Saharan African organization called Sub-Saharan African Skills and Apprenticeship Stakeholders Network, which is headquartered in Abuja. I'm the Secretary General. But what we are saying is that partners, development partners, must also look into that. Even the loans that they contracted to our countries, they can even substitute this in terms of loan relief, debt relief. The governments, the monies that they are giving back in terms of servicing debts. Can we have an arrangement where governments should be encouraged to invest in skilling Africa, skilling Africa for the development of Africa, and the excess skill level could be exported. So this is my challenge. This is the issue I want to say. I think President Sall knows Gambia, Senegal, we have a challenge with this migration. And the
Okay.
challenge is that our young people are not skilled. Europe needs skilled laborers. They need skilled workers.
Okay.
How
Our,
do we
our
get skilled
time
workers?
is up, so I'm going to
Thank you.
give President Marcus like 1 minute to respond to the gentleman over here.
Yes, very quickly for my dear neighborhood from Gambia,
Yeah.
just to say we are trying to do our best. Africa, everything is very, very urgent. We have emergency on all areas. But the human capital is very important. And for example, Senegal is putting 25.6% of its budget to education and vocational training because it is the key issue. When we don't give education to our population, we cannot develop the country, particularly for women and for children. But education needs also a new paradigm. I mean, we used to have after the colonization to, have global education without any specification. So today we try to put also vocational training to give 30% for the children coming from primary to give them this area so we can have technical people and professional people and they can follow this branch up to the engineer's side. And the other side, of course, is the global education, like we know, and they can go up to universities. I agree that we have to challenge the human capital because it's very important education, health, and uh, development durable, which is, I forgot the development durable, sustainable development.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Education is the more important in investment. It costs a lot of money, but in Senegal, it is for far the first budget, 3 times the defense budget. So because we know that it is the way to develop the country.
Thank you so much. Thank
Welcome.
you to all of you for this very engaging conversation. I'm going to leave our audience with one thought. Unlocking women's economic power is the key to achieving every sustainable development goal. So think in your daily work, how do you do that? Thank you very much.